Hello. I've heard about one thing today, this week actually, is that Angola is actually one step from ending fuel subsidies. And that is actually quite something. The president, who was elected in 2017, I think is Joao Lorenzo, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, he actually issued on the 7th of March a decree to bring an end to exemption granted to certain professions, allowing them to benefit from petrol at a subsidized price. So that's not the first time we're hearing something like that. If you remember, a few months ago, or at least a year ago, so President Bola Tinubu in Nigeria made the same kind of announcement, ending as well. So fossil fuel subsidy gradually, obviously, yeah. And we've seen the same in other countries, in Cameroon, in Togo, and Lebanon. So is ending fossil fuel subsidies a good thing then, or a bad thing for renewables? So this is what I want us to discuss for this week. Hello, everybody. My name is Tony Chiu. I am the founder and CEO of Renewables in Africa. What we do is very simple. We raise awareness about renewables energy in Africa and across the globe. So, if you are looking to step into the continent, yeah, and you're a project developer, you are an EPC, you are a supplier or an investor, and you want to expand the continent, or maybe you just want to reach out for the first time, I would ask you to reach out to us because we want to help you to 10x your return investment. We want to show you how, with our awareness program, you can manage to get in touch with your target audience and grow your company. So that is a promise that I'm making to you. Okay, excellent. So now let's come back to our topic of today, right? So you know that the prices for fossil fuel, they were extraordinarily high and volatile in 2022. Why? Because we had energy markets that were grappling with the strain caused by Russia invasion of Ukraine. So in particular, the sharp cut of Russian natural gas deliveries in Europe. And that had a repercussion across the globe, right? Including in Africa and other places as well. And in many countries, the price actually paid by the consumer, they stay relatively low, which was sort of abnormal looking at what the situation was. Why was it? It's because we know that now there was a range of policy intervention, that was sort of insulating the consumers from ballooning prices. But those actually policies, they had an adverse effect. And what is that adverse effect? It's simply the fact that, it's sort of keeping the fossil fuel artificially competitive with low emission compared to low emission objective, which is something you would see people like myself or people in the industry obviously will struggle against, because when you talk with the customer will tell you, whoa, listen, I'm very keen to move to the solution that you're advocating for me to go for. I understand that it may be better for the environment, but it's still not competitive with what I'm getting here. With, for example, the gas solution, the oil solution that I'm getting here. So that is the kind of adverse effect that we were seeing. And in fact, what we looked at, and this is important to realize it, because I know sometimes the conversation is, I think I was having a conversation with a friend of mine not long ago, is the fact that, the renewables can't stand on its own feet. That's what I'm hearing sometimes, and that the money that is being poured into that sector, you know, making it not realistic, to carry on a sustainable level, right? And we sometimes get the impression that so the renewable, especially to people in the emerging market, in Africa and the rest of the world, that it's something that is being pushed, and there's a propaganda from the West just to throw people into the renewables, putting them into all sort of problem. Oh, that's a debate that we can have maybe another day. But I want to come back and say that if we're talking about investment that this government are making to the sector, let me be honest. Yes, that's true. They make investment to the sector. But guess what? So is exactly the same for the fossil fuel to the subsidies. Yeah. So if you're looking at the subsidies that were going to the fossil fuel industry, and in 2022, according to the IEA. So because obviously the event that I mentioned to you, which was obviously the Russia-Ukraine situation, it's going to skyrocket it, because in general we're having an average of $500 billion that is spent every year to subsidize the sector, both the production and the consumption. So, but it actually skyrocketed to $1 trillion. And to this effect, let me actually share with you uh, a graph you could see. You could see that this information that you could see where it is coming from. It's always good to show that. So that's what I'm sharing with you here. It's a picture of as you can see, that's coming from the IEA, straight from their website. The fuel consumption subsidies, between 2010 2022, and as you could see, it shot up. Look at that, well above the $1 trillion. So that is the kind of subsidy that we're saying that yes, this was actually to support and to mitigate the situation that was happening. But yet, that still need to be known. And one thing that you need to understand when we're talking about those subsidies, so it's that subsidies going to the fossil fuel industry. So they go to make it kind of simple. There's two types of subsidies. There's one that's going for the production of the generation of fossil fuel energy, and also the consumption. For the production, this is where you have a lot of government that's providing, loans, guarantees, all sort of support, tax break, to make sure that they can keep the production of fossil fuel plant at a relatively low cost, right? So giving the impression that it's actually cheaper, but not necessarily, because actually it's been heavily subsidized. And on the other side, this is actually the measure that government is taking to make sure that they insulate the consumers from the hike and from the volatility that the market is saying. But the problem is, and that's what people don't understand, is that those subsidies, they think that government is paying, but government is simply taking taxpayer money to be able to obviously to pass on the subsidies to the consumers, and that could be reflected, in the national debt of the country, and also in the low spending. Again, that's a conversation. I don't want to make it way too complicated, but at least it's also fair to understand, to recognize that the reason why this debate is so challenging and complicated is because clearly it's not an easy one to have. Let's be honest. We can't just say that it's good and bad. It's a tricky balance to achieve. But the people that usually will obviously suffer the most or quickly are the consumers. Let me first of all share with you here. It's what I want to do. It's I would say yes. I would say this is some comment from some Nigerians consumers that were obviously complaining about the fuel subsidies that we're seeing in the country. So let me share that, and we can come back and have a conversation. So there we go.
Subsidized petrol for tens of millions of Nigerians. That's because the government plans to stop selling the fuel at the fixed price of just 43 US cents a litre. The Nigerian government imports petrol that it buys at a much higher price on the global market, but then sells it to consumers at the much lower price, and has been doing so for decades. This year, the subsidy bill has hit nearly $8 billion. The oil minister says the government can no longer afford it, and that the poor are not benefiting from the subsidy as was intended.
We bring in our subsidies, our products at a certain price, and we sell them to the operators at about a third of that price, or even less than a third of that price. However, they are resold to the masses at over twice the amount the middle-line operators get them.
We travel to Bayelsa in the heart of the oil-producing region, home of the oil minister and president, to see whether the government's right. Many say they can't survive without subsidized fuel. That's because the majority of people in this state don't get around in cars, but speedboats and other vessels that guzzle petrol.
These are the people most likely to be affected by the fuel subsidy removal. At the moment, they pay something like $10 for this 45-minute speedboat ride home. After the fuel subsidy is removed, that could become $30.
Because the cost of transport will triple, they say. 85% of villages in Bayelsa are only accessible by water. Those travelling the furthest will be worst hit. Many don't believe that the billions saved from ending cheap fuel will go to the development projects the government has promised.
The country has enough money to take care of things in the country. If they now remove this thing, I am assuring them that there will be I'm telling them that there will be a very big problem in the waterways.
The fuel subsidy is set to be removed within weeks. Nigerian unions are planning nationwide demonstrations if the government's plans go ahead. Yvonne Dege, Al Jazeera, Yenagoa, Bayelsa State.
Okay, so that is one quick, I could say, video talking about the impact of fuel subsidies on people. That was in Nigeria, and that was, as you probably guessed, just when the president announced it. So the president of Nigeria is Bola Tinubu, and as you know, so they've gone ahead. And what is important to also mention is that when something like that happens, because we have economies that are obviously connected one to another, it's very easy to see that when, especially in West Africa, when you have Nigeria, which carry the leader of West Africa, when such a situation would happen, obviously that would actually affect the neighboring countries, and the situation can actually definitely spiral out of hand. So that's what one has to be extremely careful when dealing with such scenarios. So what I want to show to you just right now, it's actually a video of what has been the impact of this policy in one of the neighboring countries. So for you to understand why it was so concerning for people, we're going to come back then and discuss why it's still nevertheless necessary to do so. So let me first of all share that video, and then we can discuss more after that.
The end of subsidies on fuel in Nigeria is being felt beyond its borders. In neighboring Benin, a litre of Kapayo, the smuggled gasoline, sold on the side of roads, has doubled to reach €1. For decades, Nigeria's fuel has been transported illegally by road to its neighbors. The scale of the trafficking is such that the price of taxi fares has almost doubled in Cotonou. This increase in fuel prices has surprised us all. Normally, when a new president comes into power, the population should benefit from some benefits or favors before the difficult things begin. But the day that Nigerian President Bola Tinubu took power, the petrol immediately took value. We were taken aback. Today we have a lot of petrol stations, but when you go there, they'll tell you there's no petrol. And that doesn't help us. The state must assume its responsibilities so that we have fuel in the stations and avoid queues. With the litre of smuggled gasoline now higher than the petrol in stations, they've become crowded. In Nigeria, fuel prices have tripled, with food, transport and power prices feeling the knock-on effect.
That's what we have seen, as I say. So this is the impact that we're seeing for fuel subsidies that have been ended. So it's happening in one country and it goes to the other, to neighboring. Why? Because those economies are connected. So that is the reason you will see people tend to resist those fuel subsidies, because it's having a direct. One second. So yeah, and basically it has a direct impact into the population. That's why they would tend to resist it. However, as I say, and probably the report did show that it's the fact that those subsidies are actually being paid by the states, so by the government, who is basically custody of the money that taxpayers are putting together. So when you think that, okay, they're passing on some subsidies to us, in fact, we are the one paying for that. And clearly that sort of handicap as well long-term growth of the country, right? So long story short, right, the idea would be to create a level playing field where we're having different sources of power that compete with one another, and for us to have something that is dictated by the market, or at least influenced slightly by the market. So the question then becomes, if we then say that, and we want to be ending fossil fuel subsidies because it creates an unbalanced system, so right, and also a system whereby we don't necessarily have the intended outcome that we want. So why does it then become difficult to remove those subsidies? We maybe say, okay, clearly what I've shown here, it has an impact on a lot of people, but clearly with the even due to the fact that it's having an impact on a lot of people, we still realize that it is important to also remove them. And I will give you 4 to 5 reasons why we still need to remove them. But the question, actually, because this is not a new question, a lot of countries have been discussing about that, have been debating about that. So you've seen that, as I say, in Angola. You've seen that in Nigeria. You've seen that in Cameroon. You see that in Lebanon. You see that in many countries, including European nations. So why is it then so difficult to remove fuel subsidies if we all recognize that it needs to be done? So let me again share as well with you here a short video that is explaining that very, very well, and then we can come back, talk about that, and then let me give you 5 reasons why I believe that it is still important to make it happen. So let me first of all get a chance to get the video ready, and we can definitely move ahead. 1 second. I'm preparing my screen in here, and I believe that I can go. Excellent. Let's go.
It's hard to remove fossil fuel subsidies because we have a centuries-old energy system which has been built on oil, gas, and coal that creates interdependencies and entanglements of governments with the production and consumption of fossil fuels, with businesses with the production and consumption of fossil fuels, and with individuals. I heat my home with gas. This is something that's part of my day-to-day life, and with most of us. And untangling that and changing that requires significant, I would argue, requires significant support of government to set that trajectory. And some vested interests and some actors there will be winners and losers in the energy transition. And in some ways, the government has to look at what, if you're overcompensating, so you've had oil and gas companies that have had supernormal profits because they've been winners in the current energy system. You will probably have potentially renewable energy companies or others who will have supernormal profits in the future. So you need to mitigate that through sort of proper taxation systems, but you also need to protect those who will be most affected by the transition away. And if governments do that well, then I think the resistance is lowered. If you're protecting people who might be losing their jobs through retraining, through early retirement, through good pensions, it makes the resistance to change lower. And I think if you are open and honest about the support that's provided, why you think it needs to change, you can also create more public appetite and support for reform.
So that was a short video from Carbon Brave, as you could see, which is explaining why it's so difficult for us to move into a system, without a fuel subsidy. And that's why you see that there's so much resistance, simply because we have in a society that has been built around fossil fuel. So taking that from one day to the next, it's something extremely difficult. So it has to be done meticulously. But we recognize, that's what we show in the first part of our live video today, is that removing subsidies, if it's not done carefully, has a direct impact into consumers, right? And they won't understand it. And because they won't understand it, they will also tend to resist something that's ultimately, it's good for them. It's actually leading us towards a more prosperous world, right? So now, having said that, as I say, so when you're having such difficult questions, and like I've always said, even if we move into, let's say, a new system, energy transition, as we're talking about, there's going to be some bumps along the road. Some of the policies will be right, other no good at all. But the best way normally to move towards such a system is to look at what has happened before, what have other people done before, in order to take inspiration, right? So we may be thinking that, okay, removing fuel subsidies is something difficult, but do we have countries that have managed to achieve that well? Yes, the response to that is yes. So you have countries like, I'm just going to mention that to them, and feel free to go and do your own research. So you have countries like Philippines, Indonesia, Ghana, Morocco, right? So those countries have been able to obviously, put together policies to end, or at least to reduce fuel subsidies. Because I understand that you can't necessarily remove them altogether on in one go. You have to do that gradually. And because they were aware that, usually doing it will have an impact on the, let's say, the most vulnerable in the society. You need to find a way to counterbalance that, to mitigate that effect. What is that they were doing? They were providing some, some cash, um, cash prices, cash advances, allowances to these people, especially to support them into very important sectors of the society that sort of allow them to still take care of their family, of their livelihood. Things like, for example, education, health, and so on and so forth. They were actually provided with some allowances that allow them to be able to, let's say, to compensate for the increase that will be seen, as a result of the application of ending a few subsidies. Those countries have done it, and it seems to have worked relatively well. So if you don't do it this way, if you don't have the most vulnerable of the society at your heart, clearly you're probably going to be going and applying some policies that won't work as well. An example of that is, for example, India. So India also, so a couple of years ago, they wanted to implement, end of subsidies for LPGs. So what they've done, obviously, has kind of not worked well, simply because, so why, obviously, the ending of the subsidies, because that's usually the typical reaction that you have. When you end up the subsidy, you can expect that the fuel prices will actually hike up, right? Because you end the subsidy. So obviously, so the producers want to compensate from that. They're passing on the difference to the consumers. So it will hike up. Now, for the wealthy of the society, or let's say people that are relatively well off in the middle class, they can cope with that. Yeah. So obviously they won't be happy. Nobody's happy with that, but they will cope with that. But the people that struggle the most are usually, like I said, the most vulnerable. So what happened in India when they removed the LPGs, it was obviously the most vulnerable. Obviously, they weren't able to cope with it. So the government, being aware of that, what they wanted to do, they were handing over some bottle of free bottle of LPGs to this section of the population, right? In order to help them to cope with that. The problem is, because the policy wasn't necessarily well thought through, so they miscalculate the amount of free bottle that they would need. So what happened is, what was needed on the field was a lot more than what they were able to provide. So people ended up going back to wood fire, or this sort of energy sources in order for them to cope. Because, like I say, so you can't live your life without energy. You got to find a way to get that energy. So they were going back to methods that were obviously more polluting. That's what the government wanted them to use. So obviously that was a counter effect. So obviously they had to address that. Another example was in Ecuador, right? So it's same thing as them. They wanted to reduce the fuel subsidies, so that are linked to fossil fuel. That obviously led to some big civil unrest in the country. So they had to adjust that, and the country and the president had to obviously roll back those measures and engage in the collaboration and communication, but yeah, better consultation with the public. So that is actually what we see. So it's clearly something that is needed, but you need to do that very carefully. You need to have good policy in place in order for you to be able to get the population to understand what you are looking to do, and to work and to work and work with you. But let me just end up this video and saying and giving you 5 reasons why I believe that it is still necessary to do that, to go ahead with obviously ending fuel subsidy progressively, gradually. So number one is the fact that it just simply free up, public money. Because as I say, and I showed that to you, maybe let me show you again another graph here that you will see. You better appreciate that. So let me see if I can, yeah, if I can send it. Yeah, I can see. Yep. So what I'm showing to you here. So you don't see yet. Now you see. So what you see here, it's the amount of money simply that the European Union, for example, the government is spending on measure to reduce bill. That was during the energy crisis. Yeah, we talked about 250 billion, dollar, right? That was in European Union. The rest of advanced economy, we talked about 163, and the rest of it, it's 114. So as I say, this is significant amount of money that is actually be actually put to mitigate the volatility that we see, with fossil fuel. So those kind of subsidy, as I say, so if we were to stop and the fuel subsidies, definitely it would free that public money. And with that public money, you can now reinvest that in sectors where you believe you can get, better value for money. Yeah, you can invest a lot more into renewables, for example, for you to energy efficiencies. That's money that you're saving. So that's the first reason why, for me, we need to be ending fossil fuel subsidy gradually. That's what I'm saying here. The second reason, obviously, environmental one, right? It's the fact that it would obviously, um, obviously reduce or slow down global warming, because when you're making fossil fuel artificially, more competitive than renewable, which is the case when you're passing on a lot of subsidies, you keep on accelerating global warming. Yeah, and obviously some studies have shown that if we were to phase out completely fossil fuel, which is not something that's going to happen overnight, that we agree. But let's imagine we're able to do that. You can bring down the level of emission by 28%, which is significant. That's probably something that what we need. So how can we work towards it? That's why, for me, there has to be a gradual process to do it. And also the fact that studies have also demonstrated that phasing or basically ending fuel subsidies clearly as well. What has been done so far has not been in favor of the most vulnerable in the in society. So when you passing on, those subsidies to the fossil fuel, it benefits the welfare. So that's what has been shown. That's clearly not something that we want to see. This is the third reason why I believe that it has to be stopped. And also, you speed up the transition to renewables. Look at, for example, what happened in Nigeria because of the fuel subsidies that is gradually being phased out. So there is a sort of a local boom of the boost in the solar industry. People are looking at, okay, all of a sudden they realize that, okay, their gas solution is not as cheap as what they thought. So they're looking at what are the alternatives. Now they start looking at solar. All of a sudden, it looks much more attractive, including as well the local investors. So clearly that speed up the transition to renewables. That's what we've seen in other places as well. And also the fact that we're just becoming, number 5, more energy efficient. So these are 5 reasons that, for me, we still need to go ahead, but we need to do that with proper policy that will take into account the most vulnerable in the society and allow us to move into a system whereby we've properly calculated what are the risks, what are the impact, and how can we mitigate that. But we need to also make sure that we preserve the long-term robustness of our economy, of our society, and make sure that we can bring those emissions down. Yeah. So those 5 reasons, like I say, free up the public money. That will slow down global warming. Obviously, benefit the more vulnerable in society. It will speed up the transition to renewables, and also will become a lot more energy efficient. So, what do you think? So, obviously, I've been explaining to you here the reason why I believe we should be ending fuel subsidies, and I believe I responded to my questions here. I believe it's a catalyst. Yes, there are some challenges linked to that, but it is a catalyst nevertheless. But what do you think? Do you agree with me? So, or do you think that, oh no, what I'm saying here, it's not completely true, and you want to demonstrate to me why? I love to see that in the comments, and that'd be fantastic. So don't feel free to drop your message there and to let me know what you think. So that would be good. Yep. So that is what I had to say for today. But I want to end up and say, so if you, like me, think that we need to be ending fuel subsidies, but we know that government won't do that as fast as we want, it comes down to you. So as a consumer, what can you do to make sure that at your level you start stopping the fuel subsidy? You could, for example, take your own money and invest more into alternative solutions. For example, create a bigger demand for sources like renewables or wind, any other renewables. How can you do it? Are you doing it? That's my question to you. So that's all I had to say for today. So I don't think there is any question. So if there is, just leave that to me in the comments. I'll make sure that I respond to that. But it was a pleasure for me talking to you as usual, and I'll talk to you first of all tomorrow. For the rest of the week, we have a very, very interesting topic. But also next week, we have another topic that we want to discuss. Take care, guys, and have a great day. Take care.